Welcome to the Pastors and Money podcast. I'm Joy Suzanne Hunt, pastor and financial coach, bringing you conversations about personal finance, church finance, and how we disciple our churches in the areas of finance and stewardship. You can find the episode show notes and more at pastorsandmoney.com. And here's the show. Today's interview is with Pastor Christina. Pastor Christina is the lead pastor of a small rural church in California, and we have a great conversation about how finances can look in a small church. Christina, welcome to the Pastors and Money podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So, Christina, could you tell us just briefly what's your ministry role and how you got started in ministry?
Yeah, so I've been doing ministry for a lot of years. I would even say decades, but I've been in my position now only for 3 years. So I'm the senior pastor of our church, and I started as the children's pastor. I've been there at the church since April of 2017. So we're going on quite a few years. And I started actually as the children's pastor, and then I kind of graduated into the interim pastor when the lead pastor and his wife left. And so I led the church through transition for about 5 months and then was voted in as the senior pastor. And April is officially 3 years as the senior pastor.
So, and the church that you're with is in a pretty small, not just a small church, but in a pretty small community, right?
Yeah, so we probably have around 3,500 people in our town. So yeah, it's small, it's rural. There's cow pastures. There's no big grocery store to the drive to go to those things.
So what are some of the unique financial challenges that small churches or more rural churches face?
I would definitely say you have a little bit bigger of a challenge in building up your congregation. It's not impossible, but it is challenging. And that can go on all kinds of aspects, something as simple as staffing, finding people to be on your staff, because when you're far out in a rural area, you have to be able to financially support them if you bring them out that far. So it can be challenging in finding people that will want to come and serve. So it's always better to raise up local from your rural area if you can, because it's financially better on all sides. But that can be hard depending on who's in your area and just, having enough people in there to financially support the church. But I find that every season is a little different and God just takes care of it.
So what are some of the things that you've tried to be able to help fund your ministry? And are there some things that you tried that worked or some things you tried that didn't work?
Yeah, so our church went through quite a bit, and we recently have had some new people that have come in, and we're growing, which is amazing, and we're so grateful for that. But I would say in the first 3 years post-COVID, post-pastoral transition, post just a lot of things that had happened, the congregation was really small. And I remember at one point we had maybe like 15 people. It got really, really to a low amount of people that were faithfully coming and supporting the church. And a couple of different things that we did. One is that we just did fundraisers. Anytime we could do a fundraiser, we would do a fundraiser. For us, one of the things that is kind of cool and I think works really well for a church, the two things are bake sales and car washes. Those are always a win. The car wash, especially because we're out in the middle of nowhere and not everybody wants to drive to town to get their car washed, because to get to town, it's going to be 35 minutes at least. And if you want to go into town, it's an hour. So the car washes are great. People love coming for those. We usually have a really good turnout. Bake sales are good too. And sometimes we'll combine them. So they'll come and get their car washed, and then we'll have like a tent set up where they can buy baked goods at the same time. And that has helped definitely for getting kids to camp, just, different things that we have had. It has been a good way of bringing in, income for the church and supporting the needs of the church.
I love that too, because those are things that your people can get involved in and really participate, even from whether a younger age or an older age, that they can kind of have hands-on in that process.
Oh, absolutely. My son, who is now 5 and in kindergarten, started doing car washes when he was 3. And he wasn't even going to camp, but, mom's a pastor, so he's there. And he helped wash the cars to send the other kids to camp. So really, it's anybody who wants to help can come and help and be supportive. And I think if a 3-year-old can wash cars, I mean, come on, most people can. Or they can sit and help. Like we have one lady that can't do a whole lot, but she loves her church and she wants to serve, and she can't physically wash the cars, but she sits there and takes the money for the baked goods. Everybody has a part.
I love that. That sounds like so much fun. So have you explored anything that's a little bit unconventional or a little bit different in terms of how to supplement your church's income, being, again, in a small church in a small community?
Yeah. So there's some different ways that you can do that, but I want to put the foundation of everything goes back to God's will, right? So I believe that he puts time and resources in our hands, and we do the best with what he has given us, right? But I also believe in God's sovereignty that if he wants the doors to close, he's going to close them. So I do the best I can until he tells me not to anymore. And some of the things that we've done is we have reached out to people for support. And what I mean by that is that when my husband and I were first married, we were actually missionaries. So the first year and a half we were married, we lived in Mexico, and we haven't done that for a really long time, maybe over a decade. But I find that God just works in really crazy ways, because in our church, like I said, this season, there wasn't enough people to support a pastor's salary. However, we still had our own things to take care of. I still have a house and we have bills, and I can afford to not take a salary. But this is just God. Somebody that used to support us when we did missionaries just randomly showed up one day saying they wanted to support us. And I said, what? And we didn't ask them to come. We didn't call them. They just showed up. But they don't go to our church. They live down in another location, but they came one time just to check it out and support us and, let us know how they were. And they still don't go to our church. However, there has been this individual and others that have said, okay, well, they believe in us and they want to support us anyways. So they would pledge a certain amount to cover a part of my salary to the church, even though they don't go to the church, just to make sure that our needs are taken care of, because they believe in the call of God that's on our lives and our obedience to that call, even when we don't see how it's going to come about. And so there has been that financial blessing that helps. That's one way. Another way is pay cuts, and that's a hard one. Something I was thinking about today, and, sacrifice. As a pastor, there's really no way around it. Sacrifice is part of the character of Jesus and who Jesus was. And taking a pay cut and getting another job sometimes is necessary. And I think sometimes people will avoid that at all costs. But if you really believe in what God has called you to and seeing it through to the other side, you're willing to sacrifice on your own part to do it. And so we reached out, we wanted people to support us. Secondly, taking a pay cut and going and getting another job. Those two combination of things have seemed to work. And just prayer. I would say prayer before any of that, because our church has been praying and praying and praying to come out of this rut and to come out of this hole. And there was a very dry season with very few people. And then even just in the last 6 months, new people just randomly started showing up. And it was like we could finally see the fruit of sacrifice and the fruit of prayer and the fruit of just waiting on the Lord. And the story, it's really funny because the story of the loaves and the fishes came to us so many times by people that didn't even go to our church. People came and taught at our staff retreats, and they would bring up that story of the loaves and the fishes. And we're like, God, we only have this little bit of resource. How are we going to make it through this season? And that story would come up again and again. And God was just reassuring us that really it was our faith and our trust in his character and his plans for our church that was going to carry us through. Yes, I take step one. I take a pay cut, or I do this, or I do that. Yes, I reach out, and even then God sent that person, right? I didn't necessarily tell them until they showed up first, right? So that was God sovereignly bringing that person, which was amazing. I went and took a pay cut and got another job, and the lady at the job ended up paying me more because she knew why I needed the job, and God orchestrated and worked in that situation. And so you don't have to take traditional avenues. You just have to be willing to let God be God and to lead you into whatever steps to take to keep the church floating. Because at the end of the day, there's nothing you can do to keep the doors open, right? You can be faithful with what he's given you, but at the end of the day, if it's his will to close them, he's going to close them. And so we trusted in the nature and the character of God, his plans for the church. and just did absolutely everything we could get our hands on to be faithful with, if that makes sense.
Yeah. What I love you shared about listening to where God is leading you. And that, like you said, that if he wants the doors to stay open, he's going to keep them open.
Yeah.
And when it was time for you to transition to adding another job, he opened that door, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes I feel like we try to solve God's problems for him, right? By putting, and there's some point where we're called to be stewards. And so we're going to go investigate the solutions and do the research, and we should do those things, but also listening, because in some situations, the right choice is going to be to take the other job. And some situations it's not. In
Right.
some situations, the right thing is going to be an outside source or some special thing. And sometimes God's got a different miracle, but
Yeah.
listening and walking through those open doors as they show up, that's really powerful. I love
Yeah.
that.
Another thing too that I was thinking of while I was sharing with you was that there was a few people that had gone to the church, one in particular, obviously no names, but they left the church and they had been part of the church for a long time, and they continued to support the church for years after they left. And I'm talking like their full tithe, like it was a good amount, and they hadn't been there in years. And we're thinking, like, in the middle of, looking at a very small congregation, wondering how in the world are the doors still open? And like, he's sending people to the church, or people are leaving and still supporting the church. And we're looking at the people within the congregation and they just can't support the church, but somehow the money is coming from all of these different angles where God is supernaturally bringing it. And we're just standing there going, okay, God, I don't know how you're doing it. I don't know how we made it another month, but praise God, you're not done yet. And we're going to trust you and do the best we can with what you've given us.
That's so good. That's so good. And he keeps moving these pieces around, keeps things going that you could have not controlled or influenced that in any way. And he just does this thing. So I wanted to ask, especially with the size of your church, and now I love hearing that you guys are growing and really getting into a healthier place, because healthy things grow, right? But I was wondering, what role does transparency play in how your church is managing finances and how you communicate about finances with your congregation?
So I think it depends on knowing the season of where your church is at. So, for example, our church had come out of a really hard season of trauma. There just was a lot that had happened, and not to go into details, but every church at some point has trauma. We had COVID, we had pastoral transition, and we also had church split. So there was a lot that had happened before I stepped into this role as lead. A lot of good too. A lot of good had also happened, but still on the tail end of a lot of hard changes that had been really difficult for the church. And so for me to be transparent on the pulpit about how bad the finances were at that season would have been terrible. It would have just given fire to the fuel and in the community, and it would not have been a good choice. So I think in that moment, we really needed to keep it within the inside walls of like our leadership and just really pray. However, recently, there's been a lot of good things that have happened. It's been a few years. There's been some healing. This last Sunday, which I happened to be on the story of the fishes and the loaves, and I preached on the miracle of multiplication, and I began to share what some of the inside financial struggles that the church has had over the last few years. And I shared how God has sustained us and how he's taken care of us. But I also put it in their court and gave them an opportunity to be faithful and obedient with what God has given them. And I let them know, we're going into a new season. We're getting ready to start the Acts 2 journey. We're getting ready to probably do a relaunch in the fall. There's a lot of really good things we're doing. And so I felt it was the time to cast the vision, to share with them where the church financially had been. That part of the responsibility is in their court. Like they can jump on. They can be part of where we're going. But at the time when everything was so tender and there was so much hurt and there was so much going on, I just didn't feel like it was the right time. But once I felt released and I had peace, then I did share with the congregation. I didn't go as far to share that I had taken a pay cut. I've only shared that with a few like close people within the congregation, but definitely shared the financial status of where we were and where we're going and what their part is in it.
What I love about what you shared is there's wisdom, just like, with our kids or our teenagers or the people that we have, family or friendships, relationships with.
Yeah.
that being aware of where that person is at, and is it going to help their walk and their ability to trust to have this conversation now? And sometimes it's like, absolutely yes. And, there's times where things need to be very, very open because of different kinds of trust issues and different kinds of trauma.
Yeah.
And then sometimes it's like, nope, this is going to be too much for them to carry right now.
Yeah.
And so as leaders, there are some of those things that we carry. And, hopefully we've got good people around us to help us carry those burdens. But just being, I was just reading actually in our small groups about Nehemiah this week and how because of the oppression of the previous governors and because of the famine that they were in and all this stuff, the people were really struggling. And so he didn't take the salary that he was in every right entitled to because he was in a position to be able to not take it. Right. And so it's not that it would have been wrong for him to take it, but that he chose he didn't want to overburden the people. Right. And he essentially carried some of that burden for them. I think it said he had like 150 people eating at his table every day. Right. And was in a position of wealth where he could cover that out of his personal finances. But as leaders, we do that in non-financial areas. Sometimes we carry the burden of, what somebody is going through emotionally or what somebody's going through in their marriage or with their kids. Yeah. And often as leaders, we don't put some of those burdens on people because they're not in a place to be able to carry it. And yet when it's time as disciples for them to learn the next step, then there's a time where they should carry it. And so I think there's a lot of wisdom in how that was handled.
Thank you. Yeah. God is good.
Yeah. He says if we ask for wisdom, he gives it to us. Right. And he gives us the right direction. And like you said, there was a point where you felt released of, okay, now it's time to start talking about this.
Mm-hmm.
So have you at any point encountered any resistance or skepticism from either your congregation or from your leadership about fundraising efforts or about the church finances, and how do you address those things if they've come up?
Yeah. So I would say when we were still kind of in that time where a lot of the church was healing from trauma, but even just other times when we were completely in a good place, sometimes too many fundraisers can tend to tax the people. So we do try to be cautious of if this month we're fundraising, we maybe take a month off and do it the next month, because ideally you want people to give their tithes first, and then you want them to do any type of fundraising on top of that tithe. However, at the end of the day, you just want people to give, right? And so we strategically do in our calendar planning when we're doing fundraisers, we make sure that there's not too many back to back. We make sure that, we plan it appropriately. I think at the end of the day, fundraisers are an amazing tool, right? But you got to use tools with wisdom, and you got to use them carefully and at the right time, I guess, if that makes sense. Calendar planning has been a really big help in making sure that we have the fundraisers spaced out, that they're at a good time, that they support the needs of whatever event it is, whether it's camp or something else. We don't put a fundraiser back to back with some other big thing, right? We try to give it its proper attention and let people know that it's coming up and how they can participate. Because sometimes if you clump too many things together, people, they don't know what to do. And so it's all about how the vision is cast for that thing and getting people on board to take part of it. And our church is really good because we've always done bake sales and car washes. So they kind of know what's up and they come and they help. And that is definitely helpful.
Yeah. Well, and being aware of the financial bandwidth, but also even just the calendar bandwidth, not loading the calendar too heavy. So I love that intentionality of looking out at the year and going, okay, so when is a good time to do this? When is a good time to pull back so people don't get overwhelmed, right?
Right. And, the other part of that question too, I'm thinking even internally, right? You might have people, okay, well, the finances don't look good. What are we doing? Right? You might have your own staff. You might have your own board. You might have people next to you that are going to ask you questions what are we doing here? Right? Because it doesn't look good. And I just think again and again, it goes back to trusting God. It goes back to his sovereign will. It goes back to faith. Has God called you to do what you're doing? You got to keep trusting him for the advancement of the church, for the growth of the church, for the finances of the church. We can question him all we want, but at the end of the day, do we really trust him? And if we really trust him, we're going to keep plowing forward in faith and trusting him to bring the finances in. And like I'd say, there was a few times that we kind of looked at each other and we're like, we're not sure where this is really going, but we kept showing up, we kept praying, we kept doing what we were supposed to do, even when people would be critical, because people would ask, how in the world are they even making it with that little people in the congregation? I heard that again and again from people, that it makes no sense, or there's no way they're actually making it, but somehow we would. God would just take us another month. And, faith is not something that's seen, right? It's not a seen element. It's something that we hope for, but it's this confident assurance that even though I can't see it, I know that God's got it,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, our God is he's in the business of doing the impossible, right?
Yeah. And it was bad. Like we had months where we were in the negative. I'm talking like 3/4 of the year. I mean, there was good reason for people to be questioning, but in faith, right? We know, okay, well, God's not done, right? You do the best you can. You get help. You seek wisdom. You make changes. You pray. You pray and you pray. I don't think I can stress that enough. And then all of a sudden you get a little bit farther along and you see there's fruit and you see that something's happening and you're like, oh my goodness, this is amazing.
So what advice would you give to pastors of other small churches facing similar financial struggles? I know, for me, sometimes the most helpful feedback or advice could be from somebody who's kind of just been through it. So what would you be able to offer to them?
I think often back to when God called me to come and pastor and what he had told me to do. I think, I don't know if it really in our minds makes sense, but our calling has a lot to do with it, because if you're sure what he's called you to do, it will help you with the confidence to build in that season. Does that make sense? Because doubt is a very ugly thing, and discouragement is a very ugly thing. But when God has placed something in your heart and you know it's sure, and you have the confidence and faith that he's not done yet, then that trust and that hope and that assurance of who he is and the plans that he has is what's going to carry you when you don't have the answers yet. Building in rural areas is hard, right? You don't always have all the people. You don't, and I don't have all the resources. I can't just go down the street and grab whatever I want. It's a whole nother dynamic. But God builds churches all over the world, right? Remote areas, missionaries, people that have nothing. And it sounds so simple. And I'm thinking the last 3 years have been really hard. But when I see fruit, and I think the biggest advice I have to offer is do your part faithfully and sacrificially, and leave your faith and trust in God that he's going to take care of it. And it sounds so simple. It really does. I wish there was some formula or some, it's not. Trust God. You got to do your part, and you keep plowing forward in faith, even when you don't have the answers. And somehow, right, the Bible talks about it, right? Faith pleases God. He does something. He starts moving pieces around, and all of a sudden things start happening. And you're like, I didn't do this. I just trusted God. And all of a sudden these things started making sense, or this person showed up, or this bill got paid, or, it's just things start falling into place, and it just goes back to faith and trust.
Yeah, I think a lot of what you described is that missionary mindset, and that, even though you're not going somewhere far or even doing what we would call a U.S. missions, you essentially are.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, absolutely.
You're in a particular place. The gospel needs to get in that place. It needs to be there, which means there needs to be a presence. There needs to be a place where people can go meet Jesus.
That's it.
Right. And that being anchored in that call, that he's called you to be there and called your church to be there in this time, and be listening to go, okay, God, is this still what you want us doing?
Yeah.
And if he hasn't released you to move on to the next thing, then like you said, keep plowing, keep walking faithfully and sacrificially. But I love getting to hear, because we've known each other for a lot of this journey. And so I love getting to hear what God is doing now, because he does really use people that are faithful.
Amen. Yeah.
Faithful as in full of belief, and also faithful as in full of just showing up and doing the thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Gives him something to work with. He can do a lot. So, and I just want to say, I'm proud of you.
Thank you.
We're
grateful to be a part of what God is doing and I mean, even today, like I was just thinking about, Jesus laid his life down and he said, right, there's going to be a cost. And oftentimes when we serve God, we think of addition. Well, if I put one, I get one back. And we do get something back. But at the end of the day, are you willing to lay your life down? Are you willing to count the cost? And are you willing to do what's difficult? And you might just see some fruit in life come from it. But are you willing?
Well, sometimes we can think, okay, I'm willing, or somebody would be willing to go do that somewhere else. But this fact that the people in this little rural community mean just as much to Jesus as somebody on the other side of the world.
Yep, absolutely.
And we expect there to be a cost, especially when somebody goes into foreign missions or something like this. But sometimes in the local church, we forget.
Yeah. Well, I feel like too, like the fact that we had started with a missionary mindset is probably why God sent us to this location, because he knew, like he builds people up, he prepares them for what's going to come. And maybe if someone hadn't had that experience of like, what it takes to actually support yourself, it would have been a lot harder, right? Like if a pastor had come in and said, well, I'm expecting this much pay and it wouldn't have worked in this situation. And so God knows he just needs willing vessels that will submit to his plan.
That is it. Exactly. Well, thank you so much for your time and your willingness to be vulnerable and transparent with us. Because, as pastors, we need other pastors in our life that are willing to do that and to share. So, and you've done us a service, and it's really a ministry to us to have you here on this podcast. And so I just want to thank you for your time, and we'll continue to pray for more multiplication in the community that you're in. God's going to do great things there.
Amen. Thank you for the honor of being here today. It was great to be part of your podcast.
Thank you for listening to today's show. I'd love to know what you think about it. You can leave a comment on the show notes at pastorsandmoney.com/podcast or email me at joy@pastorsandmoney.com. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, share, and leave a review. This helps us to get the word out and invite more people into these conversations. If you'd like to connect, you can find me on Instagram or Facebook at Pastors and Money. I can't wait to talk again soon.